Have you noticed this? The more awakened you become, the more exhausted you feel around people. Not because you're too sensitive, not because you're overthinking, but because awakening without boundaries is just another form of self-abandonment. You stop tolerating small talk. You feel other people's emotions like sudden weather shifts. You walk away from dynamics you used to survive in without thinking twice. And then, almost like clockwork, people start labeling you cold, distant, selfish. But here's the truth, nobody ever told you. Awakening doesn't make you more open to everyone. Awakening makes you more loyal to your nervous system. When you start listening to your body, your intuition, your internal signals, you stop letting the world trespass your inner space. And that's when things get confusing. Because no one warns you that spiritual growth will require a level of self-protection that looks to the unawakened like rejection. No one warns you that the most empathic people are the ones who burn out the fastest, unless they learn boundaries as a spiritual discipline, not a psychological skill. So in this video, I want to guide you through something most spiritual teachings ignore. You're going to learn the 5 psychological boundaries every awakened person must master. Why awakened people, ironically, burn out more than anyone, and how these boundaries protect the most sacred parts of your journey, your clarity, your intuition, and your energy. But before we dive into the first boundary, I want you to ask yourself one question. Why do I feel guilty when I protect my peace? If you've ever felt guilt, tension, or shame for pulling away from people who drain you, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand something life-changing. This shift isn't arrogance, it's alignment. Have you ever walked into a room feeling completely fine, and within minutes it's like your whole emotional state got hijacked? Maybe nothing happened to you, but suddenly you feel tense, sad, irritated, or exhausted. And the worst part? You start trying to fix the atmosphere, even though you didn't create it. This happens because awakened people often have high interoceptive sensitivity, a finely tuned internal radar that detects emotional shifts before anyone else sees them. You notice the tension behind someone's smile. You pick up the hidden resentment in someone's tone. You sense the unspoken disappointment before a single word is said. And without even thinking, your body enters a familiar pattern. Let me soothe the room so I can stay safe. You comfort the person who hurt you. You become the unofficial therapist in group conflict. You make yourself easier, quieter, or emotionally lighter so no one feels uncomfortable around you. Inside, it's survival strategy. Because long before awakening, you learned a silent rule. If I keep the peace, I won't be punished, rejected, or misunderstood. That belief might have protected you as a child, but as an awakened adult, it becomes a cage. Awakening reveals the true cost of emotional over-responsibility. You regulate others at the expense of your own nervous system. Your mind becomes their buffer. Your body becomes their absorber. Your energy becomes their emotional landfill. And this is where so many awakened people get confused. They think empathy means responsibility. They think compassion means sacrifice. They think love means rescuing. But here's the truth. Emotional rescue is not love. It's self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The emotional containment boundary is the first and most essential boundary on an awakened path. It's learning to pause for one sacred moment and say silently inside yourself, their emotion belongs to them. My energy belongs to me. This isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's the moment you stop confusing your intuition with your obligation, and it's the moment you stop carrying emotional weather that was never yours to begin with. Because awakening isn't about becoming more open to everything. It's about becoming more discerning about what enters your inner world. And once this boundary clicks, something powerful happens. You stop drowning in other people's storms. But emotional boundaries are only the beginning, because the next boundary is the one most awakened people fear setting the most. Have you ever felt tired for no reason? You slept well, you didn't overwork, nothing dramatic happened, and yet your body feels like it's carrying invisible weight. That's not fatigue, that's energetic leakage. One of the paradoxes of awakening is that the safer you become energetically, the more people unconsciously gravitate toward you. People don't just like being around you, they need it. You radiate groundedness, clarity, emotional warmth, and presence. And to someone who's running on emotional chaos, your energy feels like oxygen. So you start attracting certain types of people without even trying. The oversharer who unloads their entire life story before you sit down. The trauma dumper who confuses emotional vomiting with healing. The seeker who wants you to validate every crisis. The person who mistakes your presence for intimacy, even if you barely know them. And suddenly, without intending to, you've become the safe friend, the one who understands, the listener, the emotional container. But here's the spiritual trap. You begin to believe that being open is always good, that your compassion is infinite, that saying yes is the enlightened option, that boundaries somehow contradict the idea of spiritual love. But reality is much less romantic and much more biological. Your energy is a finite resource. It is not limitless. It is not renewable on command. When you give your energetic presence away too freely, your intuition gets muffled, your creativity collapses, your emotional clarity dissolves, and your nervous system becomes overloaded. This is why so many awakened people feel lost during the day and only reconnect with themselves late at night, because nighttime is the only moment when no one is feeding off their presence. Let's bring it into real life. The coworker who vents every morning and suddenly your day feels heavy. The friend who only contacts you when in crisis, never when life is calm. The partner who uses you as their emotional regulator instead of taking responsibility. None of these people are bad. But the dynamic becomes draining because you are offering something precious without noticing the cost. That's why the energetic availability boundary exists, to protect the light you've worked so hard to cultivate. When you set this boundary, your life begins to change in 3 profound ways. Your psychic load decreases, your intuition sharpens again. You prevent spiritual burnout before it destroys your inner world. Because the truth is simple. You cannot be everyone's sanctuary without becoming your own graveyard. And once you understand how people drain your energy, the next question becomes even more important. What about the boundaries you violate inside your own mind? Because that's where the real awakening begins. If awakening teaches one thing, it's this. Your truth will cost you people who preferred your silence. And that's exactly why the self-truth boundary is one of the hardest boundaries for awakened individuals to master. Because before you woke up, you survived by self-editing. You learned to downplay your needs, so nobody would call you demanding. You hid your intuitive insights, so you wouldn't seem too intense. You pretended to agree to avoid conflict. You shrank around insecure people to keep them comfortable. And on the surface, it looked like kindness, but internally, you were betraying yourself to maintain peace. Every time you swallow your truth to keep the harmony, you reinforce a wound that started long before adulthood. My authenticity is dangerous. It's the belief that being fully yourself leads to rejection, punishment, or abandonment. But awakening disrupts that old programming. It brings your inner knowing to the surface with so much clarity that lying to yourself or others becomes impossible. And this is where boundary 3 emerges. Stop negotiating with your inner knowing. Stop debating your intuition. Stop watering down what you see, feel, or sense. Stop shrinking to fit inside relationships that require your silence to function. Let's compare the shift. Before awakening, I feel uncomfortable, but I don't want to make a scene. After awakening, my discomfort is evidence I trust it. That one shift, trusting your felt truth, changes everything. It changes the conversations you tolerate. It changes the dynamics you engage in. It changes the people you attract. But many spiritual people fall into predictable traps. They confuse ness with kindness. They think awakened people avoid conflict. They believe truth must always be softened to be accepted. But the reality is far simpler and far kinder. Truth without aggression is still truth. Truth without apology is still compassion. You don't need to yell it. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to make it palatable. You simply need to stop abandoning it. When you honor your truth, you discover who can meet you there and who cannot. And that's the whole purpose of the self-truth boundary, to filter your relationships through authenticity rather than fear. Because awakening isn't about becoming invincible. It's about becoming honest enough that the wrong people naturally fall away. But truth alone isn't enough. Because even when you honor your truth, you still need a boundary that protects the kind of relationships you allow back into your field. Ask yourself this one uncomfortable question. When was the last time you received as much as you gave? Not in theory, not in hope, but in actual lived experience. Because awakened individuals often attract one-sided relationships without realizing it. Why? Because you naturally listen deeply, extend compassion, hold emotional space, offer emotional intelligence that most people rarely encounter. Your presence feels nourishing, your understanding feels rare, your depth feels like home. But here's the trap. Without boundaries, this stops being a relationship and becomes a healing dynamic. People return to you not to connect, but to receive. They come for clarity, for comfort, for grounding. Yet never wonder what you need. Maybe you've lived versions of this. You coach your partner through every emotional storm, but they never ask about your inner world. You uplift your friends, celebrating their wins and soothing their lows. But when you're hurting, no one seems to notice. You pour into people who don't even check in when you disappear for days. You tell yourself, they're just busy, or I don't want to burden them. But the deeper truth is harder to face. You're carrying more than your share, and they've gotten used to it. Here's the insight most people miss, and what sets the reciprocity boundary apart from any superficial give-and-take idea. It isn't about keeping score. It's about recognizing the difference between intimacy and access. Just because someone has access to you, your time, your empathy, your warmth, doesn't mean there is intimacy. Just because someone feels close to you, doesn't mean they show up for you. Awakened people often make 3 predictable mistakes: mistaking potential for compatibility, mistaking trauma bonding for connection, mistaking emotional comfort for mutual care. And the cost of these mistakes is high. Energetic depletion, emotional burnout, and a quiet resentment you're too spiritual to admit out loud. But the lesson of this boundary is simple and liberating. Awakening teaches you that love is not a one-way current. If it doesn't flow both ways, it becomes a drain, not a bond. When you honor reciprocity, you stop chasing people. You stop carrying entire relationships on your back. You stop offering emotional bandwidth that isn't being returned. And you begin to attract relationships built on mutual presence, not convenience. Because your heart wasn't made to be a service center for other people's healing. It was made to be met. And this leads us to the most misunderstood boundary of all. The one awakened people need the most, yet feel the guiltiest about setting. Here's a truth most awakened people don't admit out loud. The more awakened you are, the more solitude becomes medicine, not isolation. And that's because solitude is not the absence of people, it's the presence of yourself. When you begin to grow spiritually, something subtle but profound happens. You start needing more space than ever before. Not because you're avoiding others, but because your system can't recalibrate when you're constantly surrounded by noise, demands, and energies that don't belong to you. Solitude is where your nervous system resets. It's where your intuition sharpens back into clarity. It's where creativity flows again. It's where you hear your inner voice without distortion. It's where your sense of self strengthens instead of dissolving into the expectations of others. But awakened individuals often feel guilty for needing space. Why? Because before awakening, solitude used to feel like abandonment, rejection, or loneliness. It felt like something was missing, something was wrong, someone wasn't choosing you. After awakening, solitude becomes the exact opposite. It feels like home. It feels like remembering. It feels like returning to a place inside you that the world cannot touch, and yet the guilt lingers. Maybe you've experienced these completely normal, deeply American moments of solitude protection. Taking a weekend offline even though everyone expects instant availability. Staying home instead of attending the birthday dinner that drains you every year. Protecting your mornings for coffee, journaling, or quiet reflection. letting messages sit unread because your nervous system isn't available. These choices aren't selfish, they're sacred. Carl Jung believed that the self, the deepest, most authentic part of you, communicates through silence, not through timelines, notifications, or group chats, through space, through quiet, through stillness. If you never protect your solitude, you lose access to that inner guidance. You lose the relationship with your deepest self. You lose the clarity that awakening worked so hard to give you. But here's where many spiritual people slip. They fill solitude with content, scrolling, or distraction. They mistake silence for stagnation. They think needing space means they're avoidant or closed off. The truth is much simpler. Without sacred solitude, awakening becomes noise. Solitude is the boundary that ensures your spiritual growth doesn't collapse under the weight of other people's needs, emotions, and expectations. It's the boundary that restores you, the boundary that guides you, the boundary that returns you to yourself. And now that you understand all 5 boundaries, there's one more piece left, the part that ties everything together and reveals why these boundaries aren't walls but doorways. Let's bring it home in the final reflection. At the end of all this, here's the truth. Awakening finally reveals. It doesn't make you softer to the world. It makes you softer to yourself. And that softness, your sensitivity, your intuition, your inner wisdom, needs boundaries the way lungs need oxygen. Because without boundaries, even the most awakened person slowly drifts back into old patterns of self-abandonment. You start carrying emotions that aren't yours. You give energy to people who never give back. You silence truths your body is screaming to speak. You stay in connections that drain instead of flow. And you forget that solitude isn't loneliness. It's the doorway back to yourself. These 5 boundaries are not random. They are the exact places where awakened people lose themselves the fastest and where they reclaim themselves the most powerfully. Emotional containment, releasing what was never yours. Energetic availability, giving presence with intention, not obligation. Self-truth, honoring what you know without shrinking. Reciprocity, choosing relationships that nourish instead of siphon. Solitude, protecting the silence where your intuition speaks. These boundaries don't build walls, they build clarity. They reveal who's capable of meeting the real you and who only loved the unprotected version of you. So ask yourself honestly, which boundary have you been violating the longest? The one that feels the heaviest to reclaim? The one your younger self never had permission to set? Drop it in the comments, not just to share, but to claim it. Because awakening isn't just about consciousness. It's about choosing yourself in every room you enter.